So welcome back, listeners. We're here for the latest Arcade Attack podcast. I've got another really big treat. We've had Sean Cooper, we've had Mark Webley. I've got, Alex Trowers here, another Bullfrog legend. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Well, the pleasure's all ours, trust me. Before we get into your sort of career at Bullfrog, Alex, I'd love to know how your sort of fondest memories of gaming and why you're growing up and how you got into, what are your earliest and fondest memories, basically.
Well, so I've always been like a bit of a gamer, and obviously that means growing up before computers. It was just any sort of gaming, card games, board games, what have you. Myself, my dad and my brother, we used to play an awful lot of games, and we were living in a very, very small space. So what we used to do was just make up our own games, our own little board games. We'd kind of take it in turns to do that. And then like D&D was a very big part of our life growing up, and all sorts. And then obviously when computers came out, it was a sort of natural progression to that.
Yeah,
really. So yeah, always been gaming, and specifically always been making games as well.
Yeah. Do you remember the first game you ever made? Then was it? I take you made it before Bullfrog. Is that right?
Oh yeah, like the first games we ever made were like I said, were just these board games, and I think one of our most enjoyable. I mean, we came up with our own set of rules for sort of miniatures battles, but then probably our most successful was we did this really cool sort of wacky racers game where there was like a racing circuit and you'd be tearing around in your little car and spilling oil for people to skid on and stuff like that. We probably played that one the most of all the games that we made. All of my computer stuff, like when I got into, I never really got beyond basic, but then I started learning a bit of C, and I used to write Lunar Lander clones. I really like Lunar Lander for some reason.
Nice. Yeah.
And I can remember at this place I was working at, they were doing like air quotes proper software for these little Epson handheld machines, and they were like tiny little handheld computers with a touchscreen, an LCD touchscreen, but they were making kind of stock checking software. So like whenever if you went on a flight and you tried to order something, they would use these devices to check to see if they had it in stock and so on and so forth. And because they were portable, because they were handheld, and the guys at the company were going to this show to demonstrate this product and hopefully sell the units, and they wanted something else to just kind of use the device. So I made them this little Lunar Lander game so that when our guy who was out there was just wandering around between meetings, he could be playing this, which in turn would also attract people over because they'd be like, "Oh, what's that you're doing?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm just playing this little game on this." "Oh, but if you're interested, here's what else the device can do." So that was probably my first anything to do with commercial, even though the game itself wasn't for sale or anything. That was probably the most commercial thing that I ever made pre-Bullfrog.
So it was never published then? It was
only... No, it was never intended to be published. More than anything, it was an exercise in teaching me how to program. So
it's a brilliant little story. Thank you. How did you get the chance to work for Bullfrog then? Was that your first proper way into the gaming industry? I know you've done a bit before, but how did that arrive?
No, so Bullfrog was absolutely my first games industry gig, and Sean's told you his story, right?
Yeah.
Mine's basically the same. Well, yeah, almost. So I was at the same YTS scheme that Sean was at, but I was like a year behind him. And it was a terrible course. It was absolutely appalling. The one good thing that they did was this work placement stuff. So Sean got this one at Bullfrog, and I got this one. It was a company called Pipistrel, and they were doing this handheld stuff, like I said. But me and Sean used to live over in Farnham, and we'd both catch the same bus. So I got to know Sean from there. I knew Glenn and Kevin from the local computer game shop in town. There was this little store called Ultima, which again there are quite a few Bullfrog alumni who can trace their links back to Ultima in Guildford. Wow. And so I kind of knew them. I knew of them. I used to bunk off school to play Populous with my best mate. He had an ST, and I'd go around his his house when we should have been doing, I don't know, fifth period, whatever. So I knew of them. I really enjoyed Populous. I knew Sean from the bus, and I was doing this programming, this work placement at this other place. And then one day Sean said, "Why don't you come into us? We're always looking for people." And okay, so I arranged an interview. I went in. I met Peter.
Yep.
We had a bit of an interview. It seemed to go really, really well. At the end of the interview, he said, "Well, that's all really good. When could you start?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, because these other guys had been really good to me. They were doing I say they were doing a bang up job of teaching me the program. I don't know if you remember, but like way back when, they were the sort of scholastic book company thing used to come around schools, and you'd order these books, and there was a series of books, and it was like Better Basic or Improve Your Basic or Computer and Video Games, little books that would have like listings of code in them, listings of games, and show you how to program them, and those little pictures of robots doing their thing. And that's how I learnt Basic. Do you remember those at all?
Yeah, it does ring a bell, definitely. Yeah.
And it turns out that the company I was working for, the guy, the director of the company, was the guy who wrote those books. So literally, he had taught me to program from the very start. So I didn't want to mess these guys around. And I said, well, give me 2 weeks to kind of square it with them, and I don't want to leave them in the lurch, kind of thing. And he was like, "Oh yeah, okay, that sounds cool." So I went back to those guys and said, "Hey, look, this thing's come up. Listen, I'm having a great time here, but this is games. This is Bullfrog. This is something I'd really like to do." And they were like, "Whatever they're offering, we'll match it." And I was like, but this is games, and I'd really like to give this a crack. And they were like, "Okay, well, sorry to see you go, but okay then." And then a couple of weeks later, I turned up at the office on a Monday morning, Monday the 20th of September, 1990 to be precise. And I go in, and when Peter gets in, he just goes, "What are you doing here? I never offered you the job."
What? Really?
Well, he didn't. He honestly, he never offered me the job. If you think about it, what he actually said was, "That was cool." But he just has he has a way of speaking to people that makes them believe that he's agreeing with everything that they say and kind of empowering them. And you'll see that in all of his interviews he ever does with all the journalists. They all come out of it. If you speak to any of them, they all come out of it thinking that it's so positive. It's always positive. There's never a negative spin on any of his interviews. And so I just left there just assuming that I had the job, and I didn't. So I ended up on the dole for like 6 months.
Wow.
Funnily enough, the guy who had the job that I was going for was a guy who was also at my school, a classmate of mine. And then eventually what happened was he left. He left to go to the States and kind of dropped them in it. And sort of 6 months later, Peter gave me a call and said, well, he used to call up every so often, every couple of weekends or so, and say, "Listen, we've got people coming in, journalists coming in. Could you come in and be playing the games to make the place look busy?" I was like, "Yeah, no problem." So I used to pop in every now and again. Like I said, I knew the other guys anyway.
Yeah.
But when Andy left to go to the States, Peter called me up and said, "You were really enthusiastic. Do you still want the job?" And I said, "Yeah."
Wow.
So that was it.
That's amazing. Were you not a bit angry, disappointed, or was it kind of blame yourself? Yeah.
So just around the corner from the office was this little board game shop called Alien Encounters, and it had only relatively recently opened, but I'd been going in there since they opened the door the first time, and I was mates with them. And when Pete dropped that bombshell, I kind of just walked round the corner, walked in there, and just said, "Listen, I think I've just made an absolutely terrible mistake." And they were brilliant. They hit the guy there. He just went, "Right, okay." Just went up to the shelf, grabbed a copy of Talisman, started setting it up, and goes, "Come on, then, let's play this." And that's what we did all day. We just played board games all day. He was just pulling them off the shelf, saying, "Let's try this one. Let's try this one." So, like, my dad was really, really upset. He was like, "Well, you've got to go back to that other place. You've got to beg for your job back." And I was too proud. I was like, no. They're going to think I'm an absolute idiot. And, because I was an absolute idiot. So I said no. And he said, "Well, you've got to sign on then." So I signed on, and he was always pressuring me, "You've got to go out and find another job." And I'm like, no. I've tasted that now. That's the thing I want. So I kind of just stuck it out, and eventually it all worked out. I mean, I often get asked, especially like when we're talking to like students and so on, like, how do you get in the industry? And I'm like, I can't tell you, because you should not do what I did. don't do it that way. Whatever you do.
Well, that's a really unusual. I mean, Alex, did you ever think to yourself where your life could be right now if you did beg your old job back or went in a different direction? I mean, have you ever thought about that at all?
I always assumed I was going to end up as a cartoonist or like a serious programmer or something like that. But then the games thing happened. So I guess, something like that. But for all we know, I could have just ended up working on a building site because I've got no qualifications or anything like that. And I did terribly at school. So who knows?
Well,
I'm just, I fully acknowledge just how fortunate I was. And of all the places to end up at Bullfrog. And at the point where they were just the absolute bee's knees. So,
I mean, I agree. Bullfrog was exceptional, and it just went from strength to strength, didn't it, during the early 90s. I've got to ask about this infamous hi-fi shop. I've heard a little bit from Sean and Mark about this place. What exactly was it? Can you explain it? And what was the atmosphere and culture like in this crazy hi-fi shop that you worked in?
So there's not much to explain. The hi-fi shop is still there. It's called PJ Hi-Fi. It's on Bridge Street, which is right in the middle of Guildford, right in the sort of the one-way system in Guildford, and it's been there for 30 odd years or whatever. It was. We had the top. I think it was 3 floors. Or sorry, we had an office on the very top floor, which is where the development was. We had an office on the floor beneath that, which is where we put one of the artists because Peter didn't like working with him. We had an office 1 floor below that, which is where Les was, where you did all of the business stuff.
Yeah.
So at the point where I joined, there were 8 of us, and 6 of us were all in that top office. And the top office was not very big at all. Basically, the backs of your chairs would bash against whoever was sitting behind you. My first desk was a fish tank. It was literally there was the fish with a bit of a board across the top of it, and that was my desk. And I backed directly onto Peter. Glenn used to back onto Sean, and seriously, the pair of them used to come to blows. They used to actually just turn around and hit each other whenever their chairs would bash.
What, Sean and Glenn?
Yeah.
And they're working together now, aren't they, still?
Oh, God, yeah. Like Glenn, for example, I've been doing this nearly 30 years now, and I think for maybe 20 of them, I've been in the same office as Glenn in one company or another. It's just whenever I end up changing a company or whenever he does, we just end up in the same building. It's ridiculous. He's probably the person I've worked with most over the course of my career.
Really?
But yeah, so it was a very kind of tight-knit group, apart from that one artist that Peter didn't like.
I won't ask the name, don't worry.
And the office was tiny. The one concession they made to I guess health and safety was that they would go to I'll call it the hallway, but literally it was the top of the stairs to smoke. And it was normally my job as the junior unqualified tester guy to empty the cigarettes out, and I would go around the corner to the supermarket to pick up supplies and all sorts of stuff, and test the games.
Oh, that's pretty good. I mean, was it your job also to feed the fish? I need to ask Alex.
Right. Okay. So there were 2 fish tanks.
Right.
One of them was just our generic tropical fish, and one of them was piranhas. And yes, it was normally my job to feed the fish, especially when journalists would come round, when I would get dispatched to the local fish shop to buy some random goldfish to put in the piranha tank for them.
Wow, serious? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that wouldn't be allowed today, obviously, but that does.
No, I'm not 100% sure it was allowed back then, but you've got to feed piranhas something, so we would feed them goldfish.
That's incredible. Wow, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, Bullfrog was incredible. I mean, what was it? How would you describe the atmosphere? Was it unbelievable? Was it kind of rock and roll? Because
hell no. We were the Bitmap brothers. They were rock and roll.
Yeah.
They were always way cooler than us. You know, you look at any of the photos back then, We're the geeky ones standing around and with silly grins on. They were the rock stars. I think our games were better, but that's I absolutely love theirs as well. Yeah. But no, they were the rock stars. We were just, the feeling was we were just a bunch of guys who just wanted to make these games, and we wanted to do interesting things with them. We didn't want to make the games that other people were making, because other people were making them and nobody was really doing the stuff that we were doing, or certainly not doing it the way we were doing it. So there was an awful lot of, we were just making this up as we went along. And partly through the quality of the people that we had, because the bar was really, really high. Like we had just some of the best people in the industry, and it meant we were able to pull it off, even though when we got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you start needing things like producers, they would have an absolute nightmare, because we were just incredibly creative and incredibly hard to pin down or get to commit to any one particular thing. Or, if you wanted us to make a really cool game, we could do that. If you wanted us to release a really cool game within a certain time frame or for a particular deadline, and have it finished by then, no, we were absolutely terrible at that. all of the project planning, all of the running of a business, all of that stuff, God, we sucked at that. But the actual, hey, look, can we make this thing interesting and can we make it fun? Yes. So yeah.
Good on you. What was the first game you worked on then at Bullfrog? You said you played Populous, but what was the first game you got your teeth into?
So had I started when I thought I had the job, it would have been Flood, but no, it was PowerMonger. PowerMonger was my first game.
Classic. I mean, that's a great game, isn't it, to be fair?
Again, because I can remember sitting there and Peter's explaining to me what the game is, and I'm like, I have never heard of this before. I've never heard of anyone doing this before. And if you look back at it, it was probably the first RTS. Like, it had never really been done like that, and more than what the game actually was, all Peter was doing to me was explaining what the philosophy behind how he makes games was, and this was just the latest iteration of that. So the idea was that he was just building a simulation. He was building a world, and you were a voyeur, and you could poke the world every now and again and stuff would happen. But if you didn't poke the world, things would still happen. The game doesn't stop because you stop playing. It carries on, and I was really, really intrigued by that.
Oh, good stuff. Do you reckon there's room actually for a new PowerMonger title or even a Populous game? Because
yeah, of course. I mean, like, the PowerMonger stuff has probably, like, the idea of like leading armies around and conquering a territory, that's been done loads and loads and loads of times. Populous hasn't been done since. Well, okay, so like, we had some very strong views about what kind of constitutes a Populous game and what makes Populous. And in my mind, none of those things have been done since Populous 2. That was probably the last Populous game for me. And even Populous 3 didn't feel like a Populous game to me. It was very, very good, but it was probably more RTS than it was a Populous style game. And yeah, that's never been done before. So, that's never been done since.
Yeah, since, yeah.
So, whether again, like, we're constantly looking at these things through sort of the rose-tinted specs of nostalgia. Yeah. But whether that kind of gameplay would find a good home in today's modern market is very debatable. It might just be that, yes, look, you know what, it's been long enough that nobody's really seen it, and so they're going to think this is an incredibly original thing, and really, really embrace it. Or it might just be, I don't get it, how do I crouch?
Yeah.
It could go one of two ways.
Yeah, good. How about Syndicate? Let's move to Syndicate now, because we love Syndicate Arcade Attack. It's I spoke to Sean a lot about it. He said it was a long old slog working on Syndicate. What was your exact role on that title, and how do you kind of reflect back on it?
So my role was designer, and by that it was actually right. So first of all, everyone at Bullfrog was a designer, right? Everybody contributed to the game, which is why, like, always the Bullfrog credits, the first thing would say designed by Bullfrog. There was no one person who had the kind of design carte blanche, right? It was everybody.
Yep.
But my role was I built the maps, although Glenn built a couple, and I built the missions, although again Glenn built a couple of those as well. And then the rest of the time was spent with Sean refining the systems. Now, he did all of the coding, he did all of the technical side of it, but what we used to do, because Syndicate was just basically the latest in a long line of Bullfrog games that followed the mechanics where we would build a multiplayer game, and then we would test it and play it multiplayer until we got it feeling right, and then we would somehow shoehorn a single player out of it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I see.
And so most of the time we spent working on Syndicate was basically me and Sean and a couple of our mates who we would just bring in after work playing this game. Just playing it constantly, and then somebody would say, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if this?" And then Sean would go, "Right, okay, give us 15 minutes. Let me try writing that." And he would code up that, say, "Right, there's a new version. Everybody, let's do that again." And we would just keep repeating that cycle to the extent where, so like, we'd go to the pub on a Friday night, we'd come back from the pub, go to the office with a couple of our mates, start playing, and then we wouldn't leave until Sunday morning.
Wow.
But because we were just having so much fun, more often than not, we wouldn't realise that the sun had just come up. So yeah, and that's why I think out of all of the games we did, that was probably the one that felt most polished, most refined, because it probably had the most play and the most like seriously enjoyable play. Every lunchtime, the office would basically down tools and start up games of Syndicate. It's the only game that I've ever worked on, I think. Where if you speak to any developer, when they finish their game, if you went to them and said, "Do you want to have a go of it?" they would say, "No, if I ever see that game again, I'm going to lose my mind." Syndicate was the exception. We played it after we launched it. We would still play the game. There was a journalist called Richard Longhurst, and he always used to time his trips to the office. He would come up with some pretense that he needed to speak to Peter about. He would turn up to the office at exactly lunchtime, and it would be, "I need to speak to Peter." And, "Well, look, we're about to do this." "Oh, you're about to play. Do you mind if I sit down?" And that's it. Pretty much every couple of weeks he would turn up at lunchtime because he knew we'd be playing Syndicate, and he would like grab a computer and start playing. So yeah, we used to play that to death even after we released it. In fact, the only thing that stopped us playing it was Doom came out that year. That was the game that stopped us playing Syndicate. We all moved to that, and you know what? I'll take that. I'm happy with that.
I mean, yeah, we could talk about Doom all day, couldn't we? How good that was. Why do you think Syndicate was so good? I mean, I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. But what do you think the magic ingredients were to make it stand out?
Well, for one thing, again, it was really, really refined. By that I mean the interface for the time. I mean, it's a hella clunky now, but for the time it was incredibly well refined. The level of freedom, and again the feeling that you were part of something bigger, that the city was alive. It people were doing their thing. It's all smoke and mirrors, right? It's absolutely all smoke and mirrors, but the impression that the player gets, the feeling that they have, is one of being part of this city that is going on without them, and being able to poke it in very interesting ways, nominally blowing shit up, but that kind of thing. So I think that was it. And Paul, the lead artist, was basically using it to live out his Blade Runner fantasies, and then everyone else was just, I don't know, it really, really clicked. But you could, it's probably the one that had the most love in it, a universal love from all of the people in the company at the time.
Oh, brilliant. I asked Sean this, and I think he spoke about the Gauss gun, but was there any sort of game mechanics or ideas that you came up with, or that we even discussed, that never quite made it into the game? Any ideas that never quite got it into the final version?
He would say that. That's what I was going to go with when I saw your questions. So the only other stuff was things like for initially it was 8 agents in a team.
Yeah.
So it was a much bigger team, but literally the only people who could actually play that were me and Sean. And so that kind of got refined down to 4. I was very upset at the day when Sean said, "Oh, I guess we've got to move it to 4 then." And I'm like, "No, it's going to ruin the whole game." And because I think one of the issues was like people would then, when we put the group button in to make the kind of concession that people were having difficulty moving 4 agents around at once, then that suddenly became the way you had to play it. Whereas before, me and Sean were moving around these squads of 8 men and hiding them in places and having different fire teams and all sorts. But it was quite. We hadn't refined the interface quite so well then, and again, we were the only ones who could actually do it, and it's because we'd been doing it for the longest, doing it more than anyone else there. So. But other than that, the Gauss gun, the idea that we were going to have, there was a distinction between kind of cybernetic people and regular humans, and the Gauss gun was going to be incredibly powerful against robots and machinery and not powerful at all against humans. But that, because it was just one night, and it was absolutely the best night, where Sean said, "I'm going to put a rocket launcher in," and he made this rocket launcher, and we just ended up using the Gauss gun slot because we hadn't made the Gauss gun yet.
Right.
And so, but we didn't tell anyone. And so the next day, when we get to the lunchtime and we're going to have the game, the only people who knew about this incredibly powerful rocket launcher were me and Sean. And we were buying the Gauss gun up when you do your kitting out your agents at the start of the game. And no one else is buying it because it doesn't play. Everyone knows that icon doesn't do anything. And then the screams from the other side of the office when we just started firing this thing at people. What the is that? How do you... That's it. And the whole office was they were just in love with it from that point on. Just like, that's incredible. That's the best thing ever. So that was a lot of fun that day.
Oh, that's a great story. How about Syndicate Wars? Were you involved in that at all?
No. So by the time Syndicate Wars came round, we were probably 140 odd people, I think. And we had maybe... including all the various different conversions, maybe about 6 projects on the go at once. So at about the time Syndicate Wars was being worked on, I was working on Gene Wars. So I didn't have anything to do with Syndicate Wars.
I quite liked Syndicate Wars. I thought it was a good game, but I don't think it was quite. I don't know. It didn't quite have the same sort of feeling. What are your views about that game in particular, if you don't mind asking?
Yeah. So the guy who was the lead artist on that is probably my best mate at Bullfrog, who I still talk to on a daily basis. We still game regularly. So he probably doesn't like the fact that I don't like Syndicate Wars. It's not that I don't like it. For me, I think it suffers from a couple of issues. One, it probably moved too arcadey for me, but the reason for that was because you needed to be able to play it on a gamepad because it was going to be a PlayStation title.
Yeah, of course.
So concessions had to be made for that. 2, the art, because we moved to 3D, whereas the original Syndicate was this incredibly crisp and, for the time, high res, 640 by 400. It looked really, really crisp and clean. And then suddenly, to make everything work with 3D and polygons and everything, it had to be this 320 by 200 thing. So it just looked a bit blocky to me. So I didn't particularly like that. And the writing for the missions, I just didn't get on with that at all. There was far too much waffle there for what you were doing. But it was definitely a worthy sequel. Lots of people still absolutely love it. It just wasn't. I don't think it hit the same notes that the original did.
No, fair enough.
And I notice, we're obviously not going to talk about the next Syndicate game, which isn't even remotely Syndicate.
We can talk about it.
No,
but
let's not.
No, I haven't played it myself, but it had quite bad reviews, didn't it? I think. PS2 game. After Syndicate, did you move on to Magic Carpets, or is there any games before that?
So let me think. I'm trying to get the timeline right. Yeah. So after Syndicate, it would have been Magic Carpet. Yes.
Brilliant game.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun as well. That was again, it was one of those. The thing I always liked about us as a company at the time was, like, you could tell that other developers were always kind of wary of what we were doing, right? Because we were doing our own thing. And everybody else who was doing their particular aspect, be it that they're making platform games, or they're making flight sims, or they're making whatever, they were always like, yeah, okay, but yeah, Bullfrog are fine, but we're kings of doing this thing. And so when it was suddenly announced that we were doing this thing that kind of looked like a flight sim, but like no flight sim you'd ever seen before, we started to get contacted by these other developers who were a little worried. The impression we got was like they were going, hang on, why is Bullfrog muscling in on our turf? Can't they leave us alone? Aren't there enough other games, weird, quirky games for them to be working on? Why have they got to start making a flight sim? It ended up not being very simmy, but it's still kind of ruffled a few feathers, I think, in the UK dev scene.
Well, in a way, that's a good thing, isn't it? It keeps people on their toes a bit.
Oh, absolutely. I think we put the fear of God into some of them. Like, oh, hang on, they're going to turn their head to this as well. No, leave us alone.
Oh, I loved it. I still remember going to, I think, PC World. They had the VR sets out showing Magic Carpet. It was an incredible game. I think it's a bit of a problem with the VR headsets like that first time around, because obviously these days they're just brilliant, but the problem we found was because obviously nobody knew really what they were doing or how to implement them, so we just did a straightforward mouse replacement. But the problem with that was because so much of the game involved what we would call circle strafing around a particular target, so you're always turning and you're always kind of moving sideways, people would end up strangling themselves with the cord. Oh, really? I mean, yeah, could you imagine hearing someone? Oh, that'd be terrible, wouldn't it? Someone's been killed because of your game. Yeah. Oh, wow, shouldn't be laughing.
Enjoying the show? Why not check out some other great retro gaming podcasts like Retro Asylum, The Retro Hour, RGDS, Maximum Power Up, Arcade Perfect, and The 10 Pence Arcade.
I think this is a bit of a silly question, but there's rumours about it, so I'd like to just almost put a stop to it. Magic Carpet, was it ever originally in production for the Amiga? Is that a stupid question or what?
There is no way the Amiga could have done it. No. There was the genesis. I can probably tell you where these rumours have come from, is because the project itself started off called Populous Village. So after we were going to make another Populous-y thing, and Glenn worked on a different way of doing the tiles, and that started on the Amiga, but very rapidly moved to the PC, where it all suddenly became proper 3D. He had this weird voxely thing going, if I remember rightly, and he was experimenting with all kinds of weird stuff, and that project morphed into what would become Magic Carpet. So that's the only possible link I can think of to the Amiga. But no, there's absolutely no way the poor little Amiga could have done anything like that.
I take it you're a fan of the Amiga, though. Is that fair, Alex? Or
yeah, I loved it. I really, really enjoyed the Amiga. Happy days. Like I said, I mean, like I started off playing Populous on the ST around my mate's house, and then when I thought I'd be in with a sniff of the Bullfrog gig, I went and got an Amiga.
Nice. Upgraded
from my Spectrum, which I also loved, to this Amiga, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, this thing's pretty cool. Yeah.
Oh, we're massive fans. We're massive, and actually, I got the Spectrum first in the Amiga, so we went on the same direction.
Yeah.
Regarding Gene Wars, I mean, that was actually one of the first games I got for my PC, and I enjoyed it. I thought it's a really ambitious title. It tried different things, but it didn't seem, correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't seem to really catch on quite like your sort of previous titles. Why would you agree with that? Why do you reckon?
Yeah, 100%. So I think there are several reasons for that. The first reason is that it never got the buy-in within the studio.
Yeah,
it never had everybody in the studio going, we're going to make this game and it's really, really cool. Part of that is because the studio was a lot bigger, but part of that is because the game was pretty weird. It didn't actually start out as Gene Wars, even remotely, or anything even remotely similar to that. What it used to be, basically, there was a guy, a really nice American guy called Richard Reed, a very good friend of mine, and he had this game called Biosphere, which he was touting around to a number of studios, and they'd all said no, including EA. EA had said no to this thing. Right. And a disc arrived at the Bullfrog office one time, and Peter asked me to have a look at it and sort of review it and see what I thought, and I loved it. And it was a game about you controlled like a group of interplanetary specialists. They were like geologists and botanists and these kind of weird, disparate characters, and you would go to a space station where the aliens in the space station would say, we need a planet that does this. It needs to be this hot. It needs to have this much land. It needs to have this much vegetation and this much of an ecosystem. These creatures must be on it, and there can't be any of these things on it. Can you tailor a planet to our needs? And you would go down to the planet, and using these characters, you would change the planet in such a way that you fit the design brief. And I loved it as an idea. And I said to Peter, look, we should make this. And he was like, and it kind of went on and on for years and years and years. And we started making it. We got Richard over. We hired him full time to make it, and I would be working with him. But the problem was that, like I said, that was a pretty weird thing, and we never got the buy-in. And we took too long. We just took ages. So eventually, Sean was drafted onto the project. And the thing with Sean was, at this point, he was getting a reputation for being the closer. If your project was going a bit wayward, or we absolutely needed to get something done by a certain time, Sean was literally the only person who could do it. Peter couldn't do it. Glenn couldn't do it. Right? It had to be Sean. Sean is the one who would finish a game. So he got put onto Gene Wars, and after only a couple of weeks, he was like, right, look, we need to make something different. We need to finish this game. It's gone on too long, and we need to make something different. Command & Conquer had just come out, and there was a huge influence on the company around then. So we basically pivoted to a simpler, if you can believe it, RTS. So yeah, Gene Wars is actually the result of a massive simplification of what we were doing. But it also had crazy tech in there for like how the creatures would be rendered, how the creatures could mutate, and all sorts of stuff like that, which was part of the reason why it was really, really hard to pigeonhole, and part of the reason why it really struggled to get any kind of internal traction. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wasn't pleased with the way we pivoted, but I absolutely understand the justification for doing so, and I think in the broader context of the business, it was definitely the right thing to do, because we really, really struggled to find our sort of our proper direction, or making it easy to sell. We couldn't sell what we were making, but the thing that we ended up making was a lot easier to sell. It's like CNC but with animals. That's easy, right? Everyone gets that.
So it's not quite the game you envisioned originally, then, is that fair?
Oh no, absolutely not. No, not at all.
I mean, Command & Conquer is not a bad thing to sort of
exactly
jump onto. What a great game that is.
And we wouldn't be the first people to do that. So.
Do you know what though? Gene Wars and the previous games and your future games, that quirkiness, even though it's a risk, I think that's what made, like you hinted earlier, Bullfrog stand up from the crowd a bit.
Absolutely. What we made up for a lack of polish in some areas with just wackiness.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why the Japanese loved us. Like, we would always be getting the calls from like the Japanese magazine, and whenever they did articles on us, it would always be those wacky bullfroggers. It was always wacky.
The amount of times being called wacky.
Yeah, lots.
Oh man, I mean, actually, before we go on a little bit further, I'd love to ask you about like the Amiga scene a bit before. Like you mentioned Bitmap Brothers, who I loved as well, and Sensible Software I used to love as well. Who did you look up to the most back then, or who did you see as your big rivals?
Well, it was definitely the Bitmaps. I don't know about rivals, because again, well, even to this day, right, the industry is a tiny place. Everybody knows everyone. Everybody has worked with everyone at some point, so like they used to come to our parties and what have you. Like Gary Carr, for instance, he's working with Mark Webley at 2 Point, but he was like an artist there, and he had previously worked with a whole bunch of the bitmaps at Palace, and I think he'd even done some work for bitmaps. And ultimately, when he left Bullfrog, he went to the Bitmap Brothers for a brief period as well. So there was a whole lot of cross-pollination. They were the ones whose kind of reviews we would look out for, not just because they made some amazing Amiga games back then, but also because they were kind of our friends. But yeah, they out of all of them, they were the ones we probably had the most contact with and respect for.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. Some great games. And actually, I'm sure you heard, Alex, I think Rebellion have bought the rights for their games. How crazy is that?
I'm looking forward to a new speedball game, like done properly, like a really good speedball game. That'd do me.
100%. I mean, would you like to? I mean, it's a bit of I've definitely put this in your questions, so apologies. But would you ever like to see that happen to Bullfrog and get the classic titles back out there, kind of Rebellion style? I know.
Yeah. Well, and not the classics, because then you couldn't just repackage the originals, because they would not stand up to modern scrutiny. The one exception I would say there is Theme Hospital, if you play Theme Hospital today, it feels as fresh as it did back then, because it was probably the least technologically reliant. And the whole game was its humor and the style of it and everything like that. And, you know, the proof is in the pudding, because 2 Point Hospital is doing really, really well and everybody loves it. Right. Yeah. And so out of all of them, that's the only one that you could just repackage simply. Whereas all of the others would require a lot more. There would need to be a lot of updating. And in some of those updates, you might end up losing the core of what made them, or what we remember making them unique and interesting back in the day.
No, brilliant. No, I agree. Right, I want to turn attention to Dungeon Keeper.
Okay.
I love it. I love Dungeon Keeper. I love the sequel as well. Were you involved in the first game, or was it just the second one?
Not the first one. Again, I was working on Gene Wars. Like I said, that project took an awfully long time. But yeah, we were definitely around at the inception of Dungeon Keeper. Was interesting, and it was another one of those, Peter going, I've got a great idea. And us going, yeah, whatever. Okay, actually, that does sound kind of interesting, but I don't know how you're going to spin that one sentence out into a whole game. But the interesting thing with the first Dungeon Keeper is that Peter kind of wasn't around, because this is about the time when EA bought us. So he was having more and more responsibilities not in the office, right? So he wasn't around for a lot of it. And he just planted this seed of, you've got to be the bad guy in a dungeon crawler, right? You've got to run the dungeon, and the nasty heroes are going to come in, and you're going to have all these creatures which are going to fight them, and la 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 la. And he very much left it up to predominantly the Carter brothers, so Dean and Simon Carter, and they came up with this. I guess you could call it. It was pretty traditional. It had a very sort of traditional fantasy role-playing game feel to it, but flipped on its head. And it was incredibly detailed. There was a lot of simulation there, and it was interesting, but a bit kind of clunky, maybe, I guess. You know, we hadn't really sorted out the interface, but it was just it had I guess the closest thing you could look at it these days would be Dwarf Fortress. They basically wrote like a goblin Dwarf Fortress, I guess, is the simple way of putting it. Which was cool, and they kind of were left to their own devices to do that for a couple of years, and then Peter kind of came back in one day and just went, "This isn't working. We're going back to square one," and they essentially reset the project and started again from scratch. Like a lot of the artwork carried over, but and I think the engine did, but the way it was presented and the interface, then it became the tapping on blocks to mark them for mining, and the hand, and all sorts of stuff like that, and was just incredibly streamlined and much more kind of focused from that point. So it was a really good idea. But if anyone ever wonders why Dungeon Keeper took so long to make, it's because we made it twice.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Wow. I mean, but then it was worth the wait, because it was a great game. Were you a fan of it yourself, the finished the product?
I didn't have time to be a fan. I was too busy on the other project. But no, I liked it. I loved the premise. I loved the mechanics. I loved the simplicity of the manipulating the creatures. And again, for me, a core tenet of those games and why I like those games is the voyeuristic aspect. I was happiest when I had my dungeon and it was running and I could leave it. And I really, really hated the fact that these heroes would come in and just tunnel their way in and ruin my entire dungeon. That really used to wind me up. But yeah, no, I liked the game. I thought it was pretty cool.
It's a clever game. How about Dungeon Keeper 2 then? You're involved in that, is that right then?
Yes, so I was one of the core design team on that. There was myself, Sean, my brother, and a guy called Zy Nicholson. and we were the like the systems designers, and then there was a suite of people who would actually level designers building the actual missions and stuff as well. But we'd be coming up with all of the different systems at play and how they all work together.
Good stuff. How? Yeah, sorry, Alex.
No, that was it. So I mean, and Dungeon Keeper 2 was basically just more refined, I guess. You know, it didn't innovate in the same way that Dungeon Keeper 1 did, but again, it doesn't have to. But we made it a lot more streamlined, or all of our innovations were kind of under the hood. The combat, for example, was incredibly detailed. There was a whole system at play for like how different creatures would react to different situations. There were sort of different classes of creature, how they'd behave in combat, whether they just rush straight in or try and get around the back or stay back and use ranged attacks or all sorts of stuff. And it worked together really, really well. So again, at one point, it's really, really fascinating to just watch these battles unfold. But then because everything in the sequel was kind of bigger and better and more, and because we've done stuff like, right, well, now you can pick up as many creatures as you want in your hand.
Yeah.
You could pick up all of your creatures and place them wherever you wanted, making all of that cool stuff we've done for the positioning and the location-based combat pretty moot. That was probably the most upsetting thing about it. We just like undid all of our work and especially when we introduced, because obviously people were going, well, it takes bloody ages to pick up all of your creatures, so we put in this button that said pick up all of my creatures. That would just make it absolutely like refining out the cool stuff to do with the combat, the cool kind of voyeuristic stuff, the detail there. It all just got smoothed too much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember that button actually. I use it quite a lot.
Yeah.
How about Dungeon Keeper 3? Was that in development at all? Were you involved in that at all?
So Dungeon Keeper 2 was my last project for Bullfrog. Okay. I left just before it got released. Now, but Dungeon Keeper 3 had been mooted before then.
Oh, really? Hello?
It was it was, and so there was a lot of concept art that existed. The premise of hey, look, can we do it overground now? Will the engine be able to cope with us doing overland stuff? That had all been mooted around the time I was leaving. So
yeah, there was definitely some things going on. 100%.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The intention was always to make a third.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the controversial third game in a second.
Again, like the third Syndicate before it, the third Dungeon Keeper is not. It's just not. I can save you a lot of time by saying no.
Have you played it? I like to ask actually.
Has anybody played it? You don't play it, do you? You sit there and you click through things, you tap through things until No, that's.
They got a lot.
And I've spoken to a couple of the execs since then, and they all acknowledged that no, that was a terrible misstep. They know they got it wrong. They kind of underestimated the sort of backlash that it would receive, and they fully acknowledged that and realized that they made a terrible mistake. Like Dungeon Keeper on mobile on a touchscreen device could be perfect.
Yeah,
right. It's a brilliant game for it. It is. You're tapping on the little guys. You're tapping on the landscape. You're dragging stuff around. Perfect interface for it. Just make that game again. But that's not how mobile games work. So.
No, good. And I agree completely. It got ridiculed completely, didn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Electronic Arts briefly, if that's all right, because you mentioned earlier they came over, they took over the company. I've actually spoken to Trip Hawkins in the past, and he saw you guys, Bullfrog, as a brilliant opportunity to expand into the UK, and he obviously respected what you did. But I asked Sean the same question, and he was not particularly. He basically said the mood changed overnight almost. Now, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Alex. I'd love to hear your sort of side of the story.
I agree with Sean.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the first time that had happened. There were kind of a number of points in Bullfrog's history where the culture changed, and I would say that EA's acquisition was probably the third one of those. right? We went through a couple of rounds previously of hiring an awful lot of graduates, going from like 50 people to 120 odd people within the space of a couple of months. That was a huge, it fractured the culture there. And the EA buyout did pretty much the same thing. Not immediately, because like immediately it was, oh, this is exciting, and now we've got money and resources to do the kind of stuff that we want to do, and oh look, we get to play with shares and all sorts of stuff. And they would be throwing like cool freebies at us, and we were all really excited about that kind of stuff. But what it did was, after a while, it introduced this this level of professionalism that we just weren't prepared for. You know, you were having to do things on spreadsheets. You were having to and there was an awful lot of it that was just kind of team buildy bollocks. Like, you know, if David Brent was to do a manual, it kind of felt like that. And we were like, hang on, you're trying too hard to be cool. You're trying to be that kind of that cool uncle who's coming in and, hey kids, and you're just using the wrong words and you're making us feel uncomfortable. I guess that the thing is that prior to the EA acquisition, we never canned a game. There were some games that never really got finished, but we never explicitly stopped working on them. They was always like, we'll finish that someday. Whereas when EA came in and explicitly told us, right, stop working on this, start working on this other thing, and then would tell us later on, stop working on that other thing, start working on this next thing. That was a real blow for a lot of people. At the point where everybody moved into the same office, where the EA moved in to the Guildford office, we had loads of room. It was never a question of space, but suddenly again that was a big cultural shift. Now 100%, the EA staff, the people who moved in, they were lovely. They were really good. They were really talented. We, to our fault, were incredibly elitist, especially the old hands. If you'd been at, and in fact to this day there is still sort of a continuing debate over what constitutes true Bullfrog or old Bullfrog, and where you fit in that hierarchy. There are definitely kind of bands and schisms because of that, and we just looked at the EA guys, we honestly looked down on them, and we shouldn't.
Oh, really?
We really shouldn't have, because they were all brilliant. It's just that they were working on games that maybe weren't quite so innovative. They were working on games that had numbers that increased at the end, and we were like a bit cynical about that kind of thing. But they were all absolutely lovely, and they were all absolutely super talented. But prior to EA, we could do what we want, including a whole bunch of stuff that we probably shouldn't have. For example, the piranha thing, the BB guns thing, the what we would wear in the office, what we would eat in the office, where we would eat in the office, skateboarding, unicycling, all of this stuff that we used to do because we were just a bunch of lads messing around who happened to make computer games. And then suddenly we became this, no, this is a very big, important international company that produces these things. You can't be doing that because that's not how companies work. And that's probably one of the contributing factors to why you guys never finish anything that you say you're going to finish. So, again, I 100% understand why EA played it the way they did. I think they've learned a lot since then. If you look at what happened to us, if you look at what happened to Westwood, where they found these kind of rough diamonds. I don't know what it was like to work at Westwood, but I imagine it was pretty similar to what we had. You can tell there was a lot of love, there was a lot of passion there, and that doesn't get easily wrangled into this marketable thing or this reliable thing. But now if you look subsequently what they've done to something like Criterion, where they have essentially siloed Criterion within themselves and said, right, you're still Criterion. Don't let us make you not be Criterion. Keep that Criterionness. Whereas with somebody like us or somebody like Westwood, it was, well, you're EA now. Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, I used to love Westwood Studios as well, and it's such a shame in a way that quite a few companies actually, sort of are not here anymore. I mean, do you mind me asking why you end up leaving Bullfrog? And what was your next kind of thing after that?
For exactly those reasons. I devoted the sort of formative years of my life to Bullfrog. I was there for 8 years. I started when I was 18. I grew up there. And it wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. Like when I was saying, like we used to go back after the pub, we used to go there just on the weekends to just hang out in the office. It was a good place to hang out because if you went there, you knew there were other people there who wanted to play the games that you wanted to play. You know, the office was a social hub. It was everything like that. And then suddenly it was, now it's an office. Now it's a place of work. Don't get me wrong, it was a fun place of work. There were still pinball machines and a pool table and all the Sky Sports channels you could want and free pizzas and all of the little perks that EA would throw in. But it was just coming straight from what we had with the Bullfrog. It was different and it didn't feel as good. Subsequently, I've been back to work at EA, and let me tell you, they are a fantastic employer.
Yeah,
they are. It's really, really good, and it's still this really kind of fun place to work with some really energized staff, really talented people, but it was more fun. It was more fun when it was just us messing around. Maybe we weren't quite so productive. I think we were more innovative in ways, but we were definitely less productive, but it was a lot more fun. So I wasn't anymore getting the chance to kind of work on the stuff that I wanted to do. Like actually the Dungeon Keeper 2 thing only kind of came about, like initially Sean had said, hey, they want us, how do you feel about doing Syndicate 3? And I was like, yeah, brilliant. So it started off just me and Sean going, well, what could we do with Syndicate 3? And I was really, really excited about this. This was the thing. And then he said, right, actually, Dungeon Keeper 2 is running into a bit of trouble. They want to parachute Sean in to do his thing. And he said, can you come with me and we'll just do this and then we'll do Syndicate 3. And so that's kind of how I ended up on that. And then the Syndicate 3 thing didn't end up happening. And then that was it for me. I was like, okay, well, I think my time has come. I think I'm going to go do something else now.
Right. Do you remember any ideas for Syndicate 3? Any just even discussions? Or?
It was very, very embryonic, but it was going to be, more of the same, bigger, bolder. Funnily enough, feed more of the like the CNC interface, or indeed at that point the Total Annihilation, which has the best RTS interface of any game. It would be more along those kind of lines. So that would enable us to manipulate more units, make more of a deal of how you get to and from the mission areas, that kind of stuff. But other than that, regular Syndicate stuff. There is an environment. It feels like it's alive. You go in there and you blow stuff up.
Brilliant. Excellent.
There's still plenty. There's a gap in the market.
I think there is.
That would absolutely fly today.
I think, Alex, you want to get on it, man. I think.
Yeah.
So you left Bullfrog. Did you work at Lost Toys, Kuju, and BlackRock? Is that right? Have I got that correct?
Yep. That's pretty much it. There's a couple more, and I've worked for many places. So just before I left, Glenn, Darren Thomas, and Jeremy Longley had left for, I don't know, any number of reasons. And they said, we're going to do this thing. Now, if you look at the Guildford games scene around that time, you've got Lost Toys, you've got Mucky Foot, loads of these little, you've got, and Lionhead, what would become Lionhead. Every single one of them, as a Bullfrog offshoot, was a collection of ex-Bullfroggers going, how do we get back to what we used to do?
Yeah.
How do we recapture those glory days? So every single one of those little companies was founded with that in mind. We don't like what Bullfrog has become. The EA machine isn't for us. How do we go back to being this small, agile, work on quirky, interesting titles thing? And then so I was supremely interested in that idea. And so I just went along with Glenn one day to see what they were up to. They were up to this little title, which ultimately was called Moho. It was a pretty simple game, but the idea being that, look, we do this game, we get it on the shelf, that gives us an income, then we can work on the next game, which will be bigger and better, and that will enable us to work on the next game. So there was a plan there, and it was like a gradual build-up. And I was interested, and I said, yeah, okay, that's all really, really cool. So I went back to EA and handed my notice in. And then that weekend I get a frantic call from Glenn saying, I heard you quit, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm coming to you, aren't I?
You've done it
in
again.
a kind of exact reversal. No, because they offered me the job and I hadn't told them that I'd accepted it.
Oh, really?
in an exact flip of what happened the first time. But yeah, so I went to Lost Toys. We made a couple of games there, and we were working on a third, which was really cool. Before ultimately we just ran out of money. We couldn't get a publisher for the third game.
What was the third game, if you don't mind me asking?
It was a sequel to Stunt Car Racer.
Oh, wow, really? You had the rights?
We were working with Jeff Crammond, and we had made this multiplayer stunt car game. It was entirely cross-platform, although politics of the time, obviously, we could never release it as that. So we would play it on PC, on Xbox One, and on PS2, all on the Office network. And it played like a slightly more arcadey version of Stunt Car Racer on these big sort of roller coaster tracks. It was a lot of fun.
What a game that was.
Yeah. But yeah, ultimately we couldn't find funding for that. So Lost Toys ran out of money. And at that point, so that's when Lost Toys folded, I ended up at Kuju.
Yeah.
In Godalming for a couple of years. Which, I'll be honest with you, I hated it.
Did you want? Wow, okay.
I didn't like it at all. And again, like, some of the people there were just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Some of the people they had at the coalface were stunningly good, and you can tell that. But like the fact that some of them went on to work for like Natural Motion, developing like the Euphoria system and everything like that. That, you know, these aren't silly people; these are top quality. But all of the stuff that we were being asked to make was always bargain basement. Really old technology because it would be too expensive to make new stuff.
Yeah.
There was no real investment in the idea of making a killer app. It was always work for hire shovelware. That's what it felt like at the time.
You're better than that, aren't you? Let's be honest, Alex.
Well, no, it's not. Everyone is better than that.
Yeah, right.
You know, we weren't going to set the world alight with any of these titles. The only title I was in any way excited about that we were working on ultimately got canned because the publisher went bust. So it's like, it just wasn't going to happen there. So after that, I went on to throw my lot in with Glenn again, and we set up our own little company to make PlayStation 3, like PSN stuff.
Yeah.
But that wasn't particularly successful, and then I ended up back at EA for a bit. Working on my first Harry Potter game.
Of course, yeah, I saw that on your list actually. I mean, Harry Potter, that must have been pretty fun to work on, right?
Prior to me working there on that, I had no experience with Harry Potter at all. Hadn't read the books, had maybe seen the first couple of films.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about it. I was never interested in it. When I was hearing about Bullfrog making the Harry Potter games, I was like, that's such a waste.
Yeah.
You know, and those games are good, right? They're good games. It's a great franchise to be involved with, but it's not a Bullfrog thing to be involved with. So yeah, but then having actually worked on it and having actually experienced the Potterverse, as it were, I've turned around 100%. I loved it. I really kind of got into it. I got sorted into Hufflepuff, to my eternal shame, but now I will wear that as a badge of honor. I'm a Hufflepuff and proud. But yeah, so that was fun. But ultimately, the contract for that ran out, and then where did I go after that? After that was BlackRock. Yeah. So down in Brighton, and I'd like to say that I have never worked at a company that did more to make you feel like you wanted to work there, to make you feel like this place is more than a company, it's a culture, it's just come here and have fun, right? Whatever you need to to get this stuff done, we'll give it to you. What do you need to feel happy here, to feel comfortable here? We'll provide that for you. They absolutely went out of their way to make you feel like you were part of this thing. It was ridiculous. It was awesome. But sadly, I never actually got to release any games there because they just kept canning whatever it was that I was working on, which was kind of really, really depressing. But the culture there, the studio culture there was absolutely one of the best that I've ever experienced. Oh. And again, the quality of the staff was just absolutely stellar. Like, especially like, for instance, all the people making the car models or all the concept artists, they were ridiculously good. Absolutely ridiculously good. Top tier. It was really good.
Oh, good stuff. What are you doing now then, Alex? Are you still in the games industry? Or?
Still in the games industry. I am. I'm doing contract design work for, funnily enough, a group of people in Guildford. But I'm an independent developer. We did after BlackRock, I went to one of their spin-offs. When BlackRock folded, it did the same thing again, and all of these little companies sprang up. So Boss Alien, what would become Hangar 13, I think they were what they called Short Round or something before that. There was a whole bunch of little studios in Brighton sprung up, and I went to Boss Alien and started working on like mobile titles. I did a little bit on CSR racing, but not much. And then again, sort of reprising my role that I had at BlackRock, which was sort of concept prototype guy. Yeah. I was working on the thing that we wanted to become the next game, or any number of things that we could turn into the next games, but none of them ever really kind of came to fruition. And then when I left Boss Alien, which by the way, because we had taken there's this, the art director at Boss Alien was a guy called Jay Green, and he's now Electric Square in Brighton, and he was the person who was most responsible for the culture thing at BlackRock and then subsequently Boss Alien. So Boss Alien just assumed the mantle of BlackRock and how it decided to treat its stuff. So it was just phenomenal, and that is 100% down to him. So I can only imagine that Electric Square is just one of the most amazing places to work at, and it's all because of him. But anyway, yeah. So after that, I got into a bit of trouble, or we made. Let me say, do you know how I made that questionable decision right at the start of this? The whole thing. Yeah, we did that again. So at the point where me and Boss Alien parted ways, my girlfriend was 5 months pregnant.
Right.
And so rather than going and getting another job, what we did was kind of ask ourselves, well, do you reckon we could make a game and put it out before the baby gets here? So we did that. And we made a mobile title in 4 months. And I don't know if you've ever tried developing a game when you're heavily pregnant, but it's not particularly easy.
No, I bet that's very, very difficult.
But it was a deadline that we had to hit. We couldn't shift it. It couldn't slip because this baby's coming one way or the other. And when the baby gets here, you're not going to be able to do this, right? Yep. So we had to get it done. And that was an incredibly focusing element, right? And so we got it done, and it did okay. It was all right. And so we thought, well, let's do that again. Yeah. So that was called Glyph Quest on Glyph Quest on iOS and Android. And then so we thought, well, that kind of worked. Let's do it again. And I don't know if you've ever wondered how hard it is to make a game when you've got this little baby and it's no longer neatly packaged up inside a belly somewhere, but you've got this little thing that you can't put down that needs constant attention. But it's freaking impossible. But we made the sequel, and sadly that absolutely tanked for a number of reasons beyond the scope of this conversation. Yeah. But we managed to make a third, which again absolutely tanked. And so now I'm out as a sort of jobbing designer, and I'll go and work for other people, right? Other people will come to me and say, look, we'll pay you actual money, and I'll do design work for them. So so currently I'm working for a company called Flaming Fowl in Guildford, but I've done like a bunch of stuff for all sorts of companies all over the place, and everything from sort of mobile titles to VR. I've done quite a few VR projects, which is always really exciting. But yeah,
Brilliant.
so yeah.
No, Alex, look, I think your resume speaks for itself. So, well, if there's anyone listening, where's the best place to contact you if they got a sort of game up their sleeve? Is it Twitter? Because is that a good place to get you?
That's always something. Just bulk paint. There is only ever one bulk paint, and it is me. I'm always open to things. Like a lot of my time I spent I'd like to think paying it forward. So I do a lot of work where I go around to universities and so on, and do lectures or workshops to the students there. But although it's always really depressing when you're standing up in front of this group of students and they're like, so how did you start? And I said, well, I started at this place that you've never heard of because you weren't born then. Yeah. Although, within the industry, it is amazing how much love there is for Bullfrog and how much cachet the name still carries to this day. I think that is its lasting legacy, is the people you meet from back then and what they've gone on to do. I'm thinking about your Alex Evanses at Media Molecule and your Demis Hassabis at Deep Mind and all that. The people that we had were just incredible to a man.
Good on you. Well, Alex, man, it's been a really good chat. I really appreciate it. If that's all right, I've got a few quick fire questions. You can have like yes or no answers or really quick answers. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Fire away.
So really quick fire. So Mario or Sonic?
Mario.
Tea or coffee?
Neither.
Really?
I tell you, right. Hot drink of choice is hot Ribena.
Oh wow, okay, the controversial one there.
Hot Ribena.
Hot Ribena. How about Amiga or ST?
Amiga. Come on.
Well done. Coca-Cola or Pepsi?
Coke.
Arnie or Sly?
I'm going to go with Arnie. It's closer. Right. In the early days, it would have been easy, Arnie all the way. But as I've got older, I've got more of a respect for Sly. But it's still going to be Arnie.
Yeah, I say good. Actually, I disagree because I'm a massive. But most people are huge Arnie fans, but they love that. How about your favourite video game of all time?
See, this is a ridiculous question. You can't ask this question. It's
tough,
a stupid question.
I
always used to say Elite or 1942, all sorts of stuff, but it has to be Dark Souls.
I've never played Dark Souls. I might
then check it out. This call is over. Well, you've wasted 2 hours of my time. What the hell?
Sorry. I'll have to check it out. How about favourite film?
Aliens.
Oh, what a classic. How about your favourite video game film?
There are no good video game films. No, it's a really stupid call. It's got to be Tomb Raider, right? That's the only one that even remotely stands up as a film in its own right while remaining true and not in any way patronising to the source material. So it's got to be the Tomb Raider series.
How about a Bullfrog game that could be made into a film? Could you imagine?
No, right. We talked about we always used to talk about stuff like this, but like one of the huge issues that we had, and part of the reasons for some of the marketing decisions from EA was that none of our games ever had characters. And so it was always really, really hard for marketing to make a standee, to make this thing to be the focal point of their marketing campaigns. So you're always going to struggle making a film out of a Bullfrog game because there's no character that you go, well, here's the hero. Well, there isn't one.
Wow.
So yeah.
I've never thought. That's incredible when you think about it. That is actually true, isn't it?
We never had a Mario. We never had a Sonic. No. We tried a couple of times. Like I guess the Horned Reaper is as close as you get. Mm-hmm. And again, that was a conscious decision to, out of all of the creatures, to kind of pull him out and put him front and center, was to try and alleviate this issue that we saw. But even that, we didn't. I think it didn't go all the way.
Do you know what? You kind of missed the trick a little bit. You could have made like a Bullfrog character, like Super Frog, couldn't you? What do you reckon? Was that a dumb idea?
Again, that's been done. Super Frog was done, wasn't it?
It's been done. What's your favourite console of all time?
That's really tricky. I love the SNES, right? Yep. One of the reasons I love the SNES is because we got the first one in the country. Because of our contracts in Japan, Imagineer let us borrow one, like before it was out over here. And I spent the weekend playing Super Mario World, which was where my love affair of Mario started, and F-Zero, which blew us away, and indeed Populous. There was a version of Populous on it, until we blew it up. We left it plugged into the wrong transformer, and it blew up. But when it was properly released in Japan, Imagineer said, "Do you want some?" And we said, "Yes, please." So we all started buying them. We all just imported a bunch of Famicom. So it's either that or the Neo Geo. I loved the Neo Geo.
Yeah.
It was just what an incredible machine. But yeah, so for nostalgia, the SNES, but for games, Neo Geo.
Oh, the Neo Geo was amazing, wasn't it? How about, are you a podcast listener?
I'm not much of a podcast listener unless they've got me on it, in which case I can hardly recommend them.
Yeah. Have you done any podcast interviews before, actually?
I've done a couple of like video ones, but not to any sort of degree. My missus has just recently been on a couple, predominantly to talk about like sort of women in the games industry and how she got started and everything like that. And so I'll listen to them because otherwise she'll punch me. But yeah.
Brilliant. Well, maybe one day I can talk to your wife possibly. But anyway, that could be another conversation. Well, look, Alex, really appreciate you chatting to me today. It's been a real pleasure. It's a real honour, honestly.
Thanks for having me.
No, yeah, it's been brilliant. I'm happy that you and Sean and Mark are doing really well. You know, are you still in contact with those sort of guys, or?
Yeah, so I still speak to Mike. He was one of the artists at Bullfrog absolutely on a daily basis. I speak to Sean every now and again. Glenn is I can't avoid Glenn even if I try. Yes, there's still a few of them, and whenever we meet up, like Develop is always the big thing. Develop down in Brighton, the conference there, which is an exercise in how slowly can we walk along the front because I'm having to stop every 10 yards to chat to this person that I used to work with at so-and-so, you know. But that's where we meet up pretty much every year and just shoot the breeze.
Catch up, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But everyone is just rounder and grayer and with less hair and... Everyone's got kids now, you know. It's a whole different ball game. The priorities are all they've all shifted.
Yeah, very different to the old days, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I've got one more final question. I ask all my guests this, whether it's a text interview or a podcast, and I'll tell you there's an answer I get maybe 50% of the time. So I'll be really interested in who you say. If you could share a few drinks with any video game character, who would you choose and why?
See, I saw this on your list, and I was like, I've got no idea. And I was trying to think of a funny one. I couldn't think of a funny one. I honestly don't know. I guess So I guess the kind of group that I would have got invested in would have been, I'm going to say Knight Solaire from Dark Souls, because he's a Sun Bro, and being Sun Bros is cool. And I don't know if we would drink, but we would bask in the radiance of the sun while praising its incandescent glory, and I'm fine with that.
Brilliant. I'm gonna have to check out Dark Souls 100%.
You're gonna hate it.
You reckon?
You're gonna be there going, why is he making me play this? It doesn't do anything I want it to do.
Well, I'm gonna sound really stupid now. What sort of game is it? What genre is it? Is it a RPG?
It's an action. There's RPG elements. It's a third-person action adventure game. It's incredibly brutal, but with categorically some of the best level design you will ever witness. However, it is absolutely brutal. You are going to get incredibly frustrated with sections of it, but when it clicks, and when you overcome that adversity, it fills you up like no other game has done before or since.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
it sounds like a Dark Zelda. Is that true? I'm a massive Zelda fan, but I'll check it out.
Yes. You could. I'm going to plug somebody else's thing. You could buy the book "You Died" by Kezzy McDonald and Jason, I want to say Killingsworth, which is kind of all stories from around Dark Souls and what people think of it and everything. That will give you a very good grounding on what the game is and why it means so much to some people.
There you go. Alex, thanks so much for your time today. A real legend, and I'll let you know, of course, when it's out. But yeah, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.